Hello and welcome to the Harrogate podcast with me, Andrew Gray. My job is to interview and to deconstruct the movers and shakers in Harrogate and the surrounding area. Today I'm delighted to have with me Simon Young, a chartered accountant from Aysgarth Accountants. Simon, welcome. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
Now, you are the first accountant on this podcast. No doubt you won't be the last one. But my understanding about accountants is, and correct me if I'm wrong, I could call myself an accountant and I could submit books on behalf of people and I will be an accountant. Is that right?
Andrew, unfortunately it is. Anybody can call themselves an accountant, a turf accountant, whatever, and put the accountant above the name of their company and can take people's business, try and prepare a set of accounts, try and submit tax returns, but they don't have to be qualified. People assume they will be. Business people assume that the accountant will know what on earth they're talking about, but there's no test. Anybody can. I mean, I couldn't set up as a solicitor. My wife is a physio. You can only use that if you're registered with a Chartered Society of Physiotherapists, but literally anybody can call themselves an accountant.
So where do you fit in the sort of types of accountants that are out there? Just make it really clear to my listeners whether you are someone who is, unqualified, who just calls himself an accountant, or you actually are the real deal.
I'm not only the real deal, I'm top of the pyramid. I'm a chartered accountant, so I'm a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. I pay vast sums of money out each year to maintain that privilege. I qualified, I had to pass loads of exams back in the day. I've got 3 certificates proudly showing in my office wall just to remind me what it was all about. Yes, I'm the real deal, definitely.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for clarifying that. And of course, it's in the name of your company. Now, Aysgarth, it's a bit of a mouthful to say. I think, is it named after more or less the waterfalls up in North Yorkshire, the ones in the Robin Hood film with, is it Kevin Costner and Morgan Freeman, where they had a fight with Little John, wasn't it, I think? Is that, why the name Aysgarth?
Well, when I was setting up the business back in February, March 2012, I said to my wife, what on earth am I going to call it? Do I call it Simon Young and Co? Or, get one of my middle names and try and make it sound like 2 partners? And she just said, call it after the house. So the road that we live in, when they're building all the houses, there's a beck that backs up some of the back gardens, and lots of houses are named after, have water names. So Willow's End and things like that, Waters Meet, and ours, not that we had ever used it, is called Aysgarth. So yes, the company is named after the house, which is named after the town in North Yorkshire.
Lovely. Thank you, Simon. Now, it's fair to say that accountants are regarded as a little bit boring. Now, lawyers are dull, I'll admit to that. But you're smiling away there. Are you a boring accountant, or are you a really fun-packed accountant? I mean, I've had an hour with you before we were recording this podcast, and I think I know where my answer is, but is it fair that accountants are regarded as a bit dull? Like, you wouldn't invite them to a dinner party?
Some accountants are definitely a bit dull, but you should meet an actuary. I'd like to think I'm on the more interesting, more exciting side of being an accountant. I do tell people a story that if you do go to a party and you're lumbered in that corner with the boring accountant, you can't get away from them, then ask them about Jaffa cakes and VAT, and suddenly the accountant will become really interested and will give you a fantastic story for the next 5 minutes.
Do tell about Jaffa cakes and VAT. I didn't see this one coming. Go on, over to you.
Well, cakes don't have VAT on them, but biscuits that have chocolate do. So therefore, is it a Jaffa cake, does it have VAT on it or not? And this ages ago went to a tax tribunal with the VAT office trying to argue that a Jaffa cake is a biscuit because it's found in the biscuit aisle. And they lost the case because if you leave a Jaffa cake out to go stale, it goes hard like cakes do, but if you leave a biscuit out, it will go soft. So if you get stuck in that corner in a party and you can't escape the accountant, ask them about Jaffa cakes.
That's why Jaffa cakes are 20% more than biscuits. I never knew.
Well, it should be the other way round.
Forgive me.
It should be the other way round, but maybe they're just ripping you off.
Well, there we are. That's useful advice for dealing with accountants. Now, you will have guided hundreds of businesses, if not a few thousand businesses in your time, because you're a very experienced chartered accountant. You've come at it with a history degree, which I really like. And when we were having a sort of pre-chat, I was utterly fascinated by history. I'd assumed that you'd done maths at university. or economics or something like that. But how has your history degree been of use to you as an accountant?
Well, I did do an economics A level, so I do have some understanding of economics, but my history degree was mainly a British history degree. We did some political history, but there was also social and economic history in there as well. I did study some of the recessions in the past and the effects of that. So I think taking what's happened in the past, seeing how technology's changed with the Industrial Revolution, moving from agriculture to more industrial world, moving from canals to trains to cars. You can see technology moves, and I think I like to bring that perspective to the clients I meet. I am often looking in the past. We're preparing a set of accounts that is a historic document, but we are looking into the future. It might be whether it's doing projections, working out tax that they've got to pay in the future, but having experience from the past can help clients with what's happening now and with what's going to be happening in the near future.
Thank you. You mentioned paying tax, and it was in the news a great deal in the last few years when you had likes of Jimmy Carr and other celebrities. I think someone from Take That perhaps, who'd had quite aggressive tax avoidance or evasion mechanisms in place that the HMRC then had a look at and said, well, that seems not fair, and vast amounts of money had to be repaid. I think it's fair to say that's what occurred. What are your views on incredibly aggressive niche tax schemes?
I oppose very aggressive tax planning schemes. I think that generally they won't work, or if they do work, then the law will change, so they'll no longer work. And from my experience, the people who set it up kind of vanish into the sunset, and it's left to the poor taxpayer who was relying on an expert's opinion to pick up the pieces. And especially with the loan charge that's being attacked at the moment, there's supposedly been people committing suicide and all sorts. Whilst I might not have agreed with them receiving income via a loan, the emotional turmoil that they're having to face because they're no longer being supported by the people who sold them, I just think is awful. So yeah, I'm all for saving tax where we can, for applying the law and the rules exactly the way they should be. But yes, the aggressive things, I just think they're bound to fail.
Now, it seems to me, as a lawyer looking at an accountant, that in a sense you're playing the part of a judge when your clients are providing you with their profit and loss and balance sheets to deal with, and you are forensically looking back at the past year or 2 years, etc. It's almost up to you, working with your client, to determine which expense falls into which category. Is it tax deductible? Is it not? Is that ethically quite a challenge for you, or just for any accountant? Or not? Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just so easy for you, because obviously no one can see your face to this, and you're giggling a little bit out, which is great. I would have thought that would be quite a difficult task for an accountant. If someone says, well, I'm going to put for example, my wife's haircut through the business, and you say, oh no, you're not, that's not a tax deductible expense. There's going to be other examples where it's more difficult to say. And how do you work that through with your clients? And maybe your clients aren't like that, I don't know, but just put my listeners in the mind of an accountant going through, weighing up what goes where.
Sometimes my hardest job is to understand my clients and where they're coming from and what they want. And there are some clients who want to pay the least amount of tax as possible, have a maximum amount of expenses, and I kind of feel like I'm constantly having to say no to them. You can't have that because of X, Y and Z. And then at the other extreme, I have had one client turn around to me and say, I understand what you're saying, Simon, but I want to do it this way. I know it's going to cost me more tax, but I just feel happier doing that, which is fine. I've done my job. I've explained to them a strategy which is perfectly legal and acceptable, and they've chosen another strategy which again is perfectly legal and acceptable. There are in between those lots of grey areas, and I suppose my job a lot of the time is trying to understand the nature of a debatable transaction and then decide where it should go. And a silly example would be use of home as office. So if somebody runs their business from their home at the smaller end of the scale, they can obviously have an expense going through the business for using their home as an office or whatever. But how much? If you go onto HMRC's website, they say small sole trader businesses can put through £5 a week. But none of my clients have ever put a figure through that low.
That seems ridiculously low.
Quite.
For all the internet, the gas, the electricity, the water, the kettle, the tea, £5 a week. That's absurd.
If you go to HMRC's website and look under sole traders, that's what it says. I normally end up with a client saying, right, we'll put through so much a month or whatever. But I do explain to them that if HMRC ever challenge it, we'll have to go back and we'll have to look at the household insurance bill. We'll have to look at the utility bills. We'll have to look at rates, mortgage, interest, rent, and come up with a proportion of how much of the house they've used, possibly what time, and then we'll have to do a calculation to support it. Some clients at that point go off and do the calculation. Most clients just say, right, let's go for this amount per month or that amount per month. And that's what we would put in the accounts. We put a separate line, we highlight it to HMRC. We'll have a line that says use of residence as office. It's there, we're not trying to hide it, and we've never been challenged on it.
And what tips would you give to people who listen to this podcast and thinking, well, should I set up a business? There's many more million businesses today than there were sort of 10 years ago. We don't go into politics of that, but there are, I think factually that is true. We've got Brexit to consider or not. Brexit might have happened by the time we finished our podcast. I have really no idea. It's the 21st of October 2019 when we're recording, having just had super or not so super Saturday. What tips would you have for people who are umming and ahhing about setting up a business, have seen their friends do it and they've seen some work, seen some go under, etc. Just from your years of experience and guiding people through this process?
I would say there's almost two reasons why people set up a business. One is because they've lost a job and they need to get some income, and setting up their own business seems the quickest way of getting back into the revenue earning capabilities. Other people, the second category is somebody who's got an idea or a drive, whether they think they can do it better than their current employer, or they've perhaps come into this country on an entrepreneurial visa and have to set a business up, or they've just got a great plan. The people who set up out of necessity sometimes quite happily stay with their own business for ages, but some of them, given the chance, will go back into paid employment. My bank manager did tell me that back in 2008, when the recession credit crunch started, that she was opening up loads of bank accounts for tradesmen, for plumbers and electricians, and as soon as the economy started to improve, they got themselves jobs back in the building trade and they're all closing down their accounts. So it's almost counter-cyclical with the recessions and everything. But the other category, where people have got a great idea, they just need to be able to convert that great idea into something that people will buy. You can see the solution they're trying to solve and everything, but it's just they can't sell the idea to get enough customers on board, to have enough money coming through. It could be whether it's PR. Some people are successful at public relations, other people aren't. In your experience, have you seen someone come to you to say, I'm going to set up a business, Simon, I want you to be my accountant? Do you think, I don't think this is going to fly? I mean, do you have a sixth sense for these things, or is there a particular types of person? Is it a type of personality that makes a business tick or not? Is there anything, is there an age grade thing? Is there a background? Is it all private school boys and girls are successful or unsuccessful? What is it that makes those businesses really fly in a sort of early founder, sort of entrepreneurial way? If you have anything, maybe the answer is actually that there is no formula, that you can't spot them. And I suspect that's probably what is the case, but I just wondered what you think, really, from your seat. I don't think there is a formula. I've seen people from all sorts of educational backgrounds, a whole variety of people. People who live in rich places, poor places. I don't think anything like that particularly makes somebody an entrepreneur or not. I'd say one of the biggest driving forces, they need to earn some money to live. So perhaps if somebody's got a wealthy parent who will just keep subsidising them regardless of whether the business is successful or not, that might actually be a deterrent, because they're not forced to make a success of it because they've got their insurance policy if it all collapses. In a sense, you almost need to have nothing. It's even easier in a sense. You're more likely to be more successful if you don't have the rich mum, dad to bankroll you. I sense. Because I think Duncan Bannatyne, has done that with his children. I think he said, you're not going to inherit my wealth because I think it will hinder you in life. Which is similar to what you're saying. Sometimes that is true. But other times when I've seen wealthy parents investing money into somebody's business, they've just had such a head start, because suddenly, instead of having to do everything themselves, they've got £100,000, £200,000, or somebody prepared to guarantee a bank loan. They sometimes have a bit of a leg up. I'm thinking one particular client where I just know that daddy will pay for a whole load of expenses as and when, and I do wonder how successful they're going to be in the long term.
Fingers crossed for them. Do you have any tips for people when setting up a business, whether they should be sole traders or whether they should form a limited company or any other type of vehicle? And as lawyers, we like our strictures.
I generally prefer limited companies, but it's not the right business model for everybody.
I'm surprised you gave that answer, but please explain. I'm pleased you gave that answer, and I think that is the right answer, but most accountants usually say set up as a sole trader to start off with. Nearly invariably, that's my experience of people that I've advised over the years. They say, I went to see the accountant, he says, definitely be a sole trader, don't set up a limited company. And me as lawyers turn around going, no, you need to protect yourself, but we're at one with your answer, which is reassuring.
Well, beginning this tax year, with the new tax rules came in, I did a spreadsheet which worked out the tax that a sole trader would have to pay if they were a sole trader compared with the tax they would have to pay if they ran as a limited company. And what surprised me was actually the low level. I can't remember the top of my head, but it's around about £15,000. If you're making that type of profit before taking any money out for yourself, from a tax point of view, you should have a limited company. Obviously, that's not the whole picture, because running the limited company is more expensive. The accountancy costs are going to be just more administration. You've got company's house record to keep up to date, whether you let the accountant do that or whether you do it yourself. So realistically, the boundary of £15,000 probably should be a little bit higher for a profit level. But it depends on what you're wanting to do. If you're wanting to have a business that's going to go places, especially if you're in a business-to-business model, most limited companies like to deal with other limited companies. So if that's the business that your sector that you're in, I would say you should be, in general, a limited company, and in general you should be VAT registered even before you need to be, because it gives the right impression to other businesses. Obviously, if you're a retailer and you're selling to consumers, you probably shouldn't be VAT registered. And there are some businesses where starting off as a sole trader to sort of dip your toe in is probably fine. But I agree, as well as the tax saving, the limited liability protection is also important.
Very interesting to me, at least, that you suggested that more or less most businesses should go VAT registered from the get-go. And I agree, it does say, that you're a sort of proper business, but you can see why a lot of people don't, because it's such a faff. Now, could you give some tips to my listeners, particularly those running businesses, about how to manage VAT, filing the VAT quarter, making sure you've got enough money? Because that seems to be the biggest risk with VAT, is if you get that wrong, you end up with an inspection and a tax bill. That must be horrendous to deal with. I mean, do you have any tips about VAT?
Well, the VAT inspectors, the VAT department is the one that's more likely to come and visit you and raise questions about your business. So yeah, VAT can be scary, but as long as, in some respects, the rules are quite simple. They changed the rules 1st of April this year, so with making tax digital and the rollout of that to all the different taxes, the VAT is the first one that most businesses will see. So if your sales figure, if your turnover is over 85,000, you have to record transactions digitally, which means you need, I would argue, an accounts package that you can just enter transaction once, and then that can be used to calculate your VAT. Obviously, if you put bad data in, you've not coded things correctly, you're not going to get a correct VAT return. Just because you can press a button that says produce a VAT return doesn't mean to say it's right or it's correct.
Simon, which accountancy packages do you guys recommend then? Because there's lots on the market and they're all over the TV adverts at the moment. It's quite exciting, actually, when I keep seeing these different packages. I know I must be a bit sad that I get excited by accountancy packages. It means that people are setting up businesses, working for themselves, plowing their own furrow, whatever the expression is. I mean, do you have a preference? What do you guys use yourselves, and what do you recommend for your clients?
I love technology, so I love these cloud accounts packages. The one we use and the one we suggest to our clients to use is Xero, which is spelled Xero. It's a very good package. Yes, there's some improvements I would like to see in it, but they've moved with Making Tax Digital. They were on board with that very quickly. It works very smoothly, so I would recommend that. There are some accounts packages I would definitely not recommend. When I'm talking to clients, we go through it all. As accounting practice, we'll work with whatever the client wants to use. So there are some clients I've tried to move on to a different accounts package, but they're adamant they want stay on the one that, because it works for them. They're the ones dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. So I get that. There's some firms of accountants out there that if you want to have them as your accountants, you must use the package, either their own or the one that they'll only work with. We're not like that. It's got to work for the client.
And do you guys offer a bookkeeping service as well?
We do offer a bookkeeping service. I find it generally better if the client is able to do a lot of the bookkeeping themselves. If they've got any questions, fine, contact us, give me a call, send me an email saying, I've got this transaction, what do I do with it? Or can you log on and see such and such, what do I do with it? But it's good for them to know what's going through their business so that they've got a feel for the numbers. They know what invoices are still outstanding, what they need to get in from their customers, what they need to pay out to other people. But we do offer, a bookkeeping service for clients, yes.
That's very good advice. I've struggled with the bookkeeping side of it, just really getting my head around it. I'm much more literate, I think, than I am numerate. And I try to leave the bookkeeping to someone else and then let the accountants then deal with the bookkeepers. And then however many months after the end of the financial year, I'm presented with some information that I'd never really seen before, which is not what I'm supposed to do. And you're shaking your head with mock sort of horror that anyone could be so stupid, but that's how I've done it so far. But I'm trying to improve. Now, one of the struggles or things I've really had to consider in the 7 years since I set up my firm, and your firm, my firm, are almost equal ages. Yours is a few months older. Is that of managing cash flow. It seems, that's probably why I'm not so interested in the profit and loss and all that side of things, because I'm just looking at cash flow. A bit boring. Do you have any tips for businesses about managing cash flow? And have you seen businesses that are really actually quite good businesses, just go under because they just mismanage cash?
When I meet a new client or somebody setting up in business, it's one of the topics of conversation I have. If you've been employed, all your tax, your national insurance is deducted each month. Unless somebody's made a mistake, at the end of the month, when you get your salary into your bank account, no one's going to come for you and ask for some more money, or no one's going to give you a tax refund. As long as any benefits in kind, everything like that have been recorded correctly, the money that's in your bank account is yours. When you set a business up, it's now completely different. You've got to be thinking about things in advance, whether it's the VAT that's due a month and a week after the quarter is finished, or the corporation tax that's due 9 months and 1 day after the year end, or your personal tax, which is due the January after the tax return's finished, but then you've got possibly payments in account which are due July and January. You've got to be constantly thinking in advance. You've got to have this money set aside. So depending on the type of business, but if somebody's got more of a consulting business where they're selling effectively time, I'd advise them when the cash comes in, they need to set aside the VAT money. Obviously, may have some VAT expenses, but if they're mainly selling their labour, they're not going to have that many things to offset the VAT. Put it on one side. Put on one side the corporation tax. You don't have to put the full 19% corporation tax aside because there will be some expenses to reduce it, but have a pot of money that's there. Yes, if the business needs it, you might be able to dip into that, but you know that you're dipping into your tax pot and you know when you need to get that money back again. But at least then you'll have no nasty surprises. And the businesses that succeed are generally the ones who have thought about that, who have the cash set aside. The clients that I do find a bit frustrating with, and I tell it is a bit of an exaggeration, but the ones who think at the end of the month they see £1 left in the bank account and they think it's theirs and they can take that money out and spend it on whatever they want, having forgotten about the VAT and the corporation tax and their personal tax. You've got to be disciplined, and I use deposit accounts where I can't get the money out for a certain period of time, and then a week before my corporation tax is due, I can get that money, and then it's going to get spent on one thing only, the corporation tax. So I have that discipline, despite being an accountant, and business owners need to have that as well.
So when you're guiding your clients, do you act a little bit like their financial director, however small or large their business is? Or are you just at the end of the financial year gathering up the mayhem of their own bookkeeping for you guys to do your magic? How do you practice as an accountant?
I prefer to be the sort of the financial director, but there are some clients who are fairly financially intelligent and will contact us once a year. I exaggerate a little bit, if they've got any questions in the meantime they would ask us, but a lot of it is just once a year, here are the year-end accounts, we pull everything together, and as you say, do our magic. But there are other clients where I'm always hearing from them every week or every fortnight. If I've not heard from them, I'll be like beginning to panic, thinking what on earth's going on. So I'll be then contacting them to make sure that everything's fine, everything okay. We get offered we have a whole range of questions that clients contact us about. And one last week was a client wanted to change a lease they had between different businesses that they controlled. And they could have gone to the solicitor who drafted the last lease, but they wanted me to approach that solicitor again to get it sorted. So they just felt more comfortable with me making that approach as opposed to them doing it directly.
Well, us solicitors are hard to approach, and we do speak in Latin most of the time.
I can tell.
Yes, although none today. Now, as an accountant, particularly a chartered accountant, you're going to be damn expensive, aren't you? I mean, no one's really going to be able to afford you until their business is, turning over multiple millions or not. How do you charge clients?
Well, we were talking earlier before we hit record, and you were telling me about another firm of accountants and the vast charges, hourly rates. I always thought solicitors charge more than accountants, but I stand corrected. Our charge out rates are nothing like that. Regardless of which firm of accountants you approach and how they dress it up, ultimately accountants will be charging based on their expertise, their knowledge, and how much time it takes. Whether you can get them to agree, there are some accountants who will say we'll charge so much per month, and it's on their website, but they'll be taking an approach of expertise and time, but they might just be spreading it over a larger range of clients. So some will get a good deal and some will get a bad deal. We're quite happy to give people fixed fees. Sometimes we'll give people cap fees, saying this is the maximum amount you'll charge. If it comes in at less, we'll charge less. So ultimately we come back down to an hourly rate and how much time it takes.
Simon, can I ask you about IR35? Now, not everyone listening to this podcast will know what IR35 is, and I only very loosely understand it, but my suspicion is that a lot of people do need to know about IR35. So without any accountancy jargon, which I've got to say you haven't used today, could you explain in very simple terms what IR35 is and what people should do about it, if that's the right way to ask you the question?
Very simplistically, IR35 is a piece of legislation which tries to stop, in HMRC's opinion, people trading via a limited company who they think should actually be on the payroll. The classic example is, I suppose, John Burt, who was the BBC Director General a number of years ago. He was clearly the head of the BBC. His title, Director General, said it all, but he wasn't on the payroll. He had a limited company. Clearly, the only reason he had a limited company, and people like him, because heads of different NHS departments were doing exactly the same, the only reason they had a limited company was to try and save tax, because as an employee you suffer pay as you earn and national insurance. The company employing you, the employer suffers employers' national insurance, but dividends are taxed at a lower rate. Corporation tax is at a lower rate, so if you don't need all the money, you could leave it in the business. So less tax in some situations will be paid because you have a limited company. But clearly, if somebody's an employee, they should be an employee, they should be on the payroll, and they should be taxed accordingly. So whilst there's some black and white cases like heads of government departments, it's not always that simple, and having a nice set of black and white rules for the grey real world is difficult, but it's under pressure. So 2 years ago, they changed the rules. Instead of having it as the contractor with limited company to decide whether or not the IR35 rules applied, any public sector organisation, whether it's the health service or councils, it was up to the top client to decide whether the bottom contractor met with the rules. And if they got it wrong, then the public sector organisation would be fined. So they're supposed to look at every contract on a contract by contract basis, and they're not supposed to have a blanket approach, but they were tending to at the time. Also, it appeared to take a blanket approach and say all contractors come within IR35. So at the time, we closed down 3 companies of clients where it looked like that they would fall under IR35. If you don't go on the payroll and you keep your company, you're taxed as if you were on the payroll. So it's pointless being back at that tax position, but then having to pay the accountant to prepare a set of accounts. It doesn't make sense from a client's point of view. But now, from April 2020, they're extending these rules to cover large and medium-sized private companies. Again, it will be the top company will decide what the bottom contractor's position is. And there's a whole load of bureaucracy that's going to go with it, but a number of banks, Barclays, for example, have publicly announced that from April next year, they will have no independent contractors. Everybody will have to be on payroll. It's a situation that, whether it's a BBC presenter or it's an IT contractor, somebody with a small business where the people effectively buying themselves need to be aware and just be very cautious and careful about.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a hot topic, and I suppose becoming hotter. Now, you represent lots of businesses and people who live in the Harrogate and district area. Look at you. I always ask this question on the Harrogate podcast to people, although you're the first accountant, people in your position. Why is it good, or is it good even, to run a business in Harrogate and district? I mean, what do we have going for it, and what are the hindrances?
Yes, our Harrogate clients are divided into sort of two categories. There's those people where Harrogate and district is their home, their children go to school in Harrogate schools, they live in and around Harrogate, but their business is based elsewhere. It might be in Leeds, it might be somewhere else. And then we've got clients whose business is in Harrogate itself, or they may live in Harrogate and the business is elsewhere. Harrogate has it has a buzz about it. Yes, there is wealth. There's I think there is an entrepreneurial attitude in Harrogate. Yes, there's some problems with on the retail side of things. So the BBC did a report a few weekends ago which just highlighted the shops closing down in Harrogate, but that's reflected in other high streets. And what the BBC report picked up on the fact that a number of landlords in Harrogate are now less likely to lease a shop to chains and are more likely to lease it to the sole trader, the small company, the SME who's just starting up or has been about for a little bit, and they seem to be the flavour with some landlords. So Harrogate's definitely an exciting place. I think Harrogate's, broad-minded. It looks outside itself. There are other parts of Yorkshire and other places we could mention where it seems to be very insular. I don't think Harrogate has its moments, but I don't think overall Harrogate is like that.
Well, you've passed a Harrogate test, so thank you for being very honest and open. I agree with everything that you say about Harrogate. Yes, it's incredibly sad how many shops have been closed. I did not know about the landlords, but I'm not surprised. The independents, I think, are doing relatively well in comparison to some of the chains. It's great, but I've never seen the high street as sort of decimated as it is at the moment. And I find, personally, someone has to pay the business rates through our business. I find it, it's incredibly expensive and quite complicated system to get your head around. Now, Harrogate has so many business networking groups. I mean, there must be one an hour. There maybe something during the night. Now, do you have any tips for people who are going to the networks in Harrogate or not? I mean, should the people be going to them and networking? Do you just see the same old faces? Are there any sort of groups that you think are better than others? Just talk to us about networking. It could be that you've got nothing to say about it, but I sense you will have something to say.
I tend not to like those networking events where you have to join up, you have to turn up every single week. Some of them do teach important skills. You and I are professionals. Everyone assumes that we'll know all the technical knowledge that we need to know, but then it goes back to your question at the beginning, boring accountants. We've got to somehow be able to apply that knowledge. We've got to be engaging with clients and learning some of the softer skills, the elevator pitch. I think it's important, and some of these networking groups are pretty good at teaching that. I just don't have the time to spend every week in an organisation, and I don't want to spend all my life thinking about referring work to some other people who the only reason I know them is because I'm having breakfast with them or lunch with them or whatever. I want to get to know people. I want to build up a rapport with those people. And they're the sort of people who you ultimately are going to, win work from and refer business to, because you've got to know them. You've got to like them and trust them and everything, as opposed to just be having biscuits and coffee or bacon sandwiches or whatever it happens to be with them.
You've been very diplomatic there. You haven't said some of the letters I think you might be referring to, but I know what you're saying. Thank you very much for your pearls of wisdom. Simon, over the years, you will have taken over from other accountants because the client's essentially really unhappy with the other accountant and have moved to you. What are the big mistakes that you've seen that other accountants have made that when you've taken over the books, you're thinking, oh my word, they didn't do that, did they? Oh my, I'm embarrassed for my own profession. I mean, have you seen any sort of gaffes like that?
I've seen a few. I do have a bit of a rogues gallery on my computer where I've described it as crap accounts, where they just have figures that I wouldn't have allowed a set of accounts go out with. It could be that in creditors they've got a negative figure, so it's a debtor, and figures are just analysed completely incorrectly. And if I was HMRC, I'd possibly be asking questions. They've not presented the client's information in the best possible manner, and sometimes they don't seem to have moved on with the changes of rules. So, for example, a few years ago, the VAT office, the rules changed with regards to flat rate scheme for VAT. So small businesses used to be able to, well, they still can, instead of paying over the full 20% and deducting any of the expenses, they would just pay over the right percentage for their sector on the gross amount, but not be able to reclaim any VAT. And it used to be a good scheme, but then for service companies, they changed it to be up to 16.5% of the gross figure, which is practically the same as 20% on the net figure. I'll let you do the maths later. You can borrow my calculator. But for companies that sell goods, it's fine. But for ones who are selling services, the rules are a bit more complicated than that. I don't think it's a good idea. But I met one client at a time when I was trying to get all my service-based clients off the flat rate scheme. They're registering at a company, and the accountant they were with, just without thinking, got them VAT registered and put them on the flat rate scheme, even though the client says that she was telling them that she didn't want to be VAT registered. They weren't listening to her, and they put on the wrong scheme.
As a law firm, we think one of the big boom areas for law is going to be in professional negligence claims against accountants, because we think, like you just said, there is some balmy things that are going on. And because there really isn't a market in bringing claims against accountants, perhaps, I speculate, they can get a little, not you of course, but little relaxed about how they do things, perhaps knowing that their clients don't understand the books anyway, and no one ever sues an accountant, so you get away with it. In my world of litigation, we often see procedures, professionals improve once they've actually got sued. I mean, I would say that, wouldn't I? But I genuinely believe that is true. If you get hit in the pocket with higher insurance premiums because you've made a mistake and got sued, well, great. The poor accountants essentially will get shut down by higher insurance premiums. The better accountants get pushed to the top. I think that makes perfect sense to me.
Well, that's assuming you're with a qualified accountant who's got professional indemnity insurance, because if they're not qualified, they don't have to have professional indemnity insurance.
You're kidding. So they could just have a paper company, call themselves an accountant, wow, and then be wound up if they get sued and they don't have to have insurance. That's outrageous. Well,
that's why you have to have a qualified accountant, because every year I have to say to the Institute of Chartered Accountants who my professional indemnity insurers are. It's a question on a form that I send in every year, and every qualified accountant's going to be the same. The unqualified accountants might have professional indemnity insurance, but they don't have to. Legally, they're under no obligation.
Oh, thank you for that, Simon. I'm probably my listeners are aghast at that, but I can tell you that I certainly am. Now, what's your biggest mistake in business? I mean, you must have made lots. I mean, you're an entrepreneur as well. You're 7 or 8 years running your own firm. You must have made multiple gaffes. Will you admit to them? What are they?
Well, the one I will admit to is I bought far too many envelopes when I set the business up. As I said earlier, I use technology. I embrace technology, but knowing what a professional services firm was like, I just thought, everything's going to be letters going out. You need to have letterheads printed. I do have letterheads, but I bought on some super duper deal 4 different sizes of envelopes. I still have some of those first boxes in my office. So if you get a letter from me and the gum looks a bit yellow, it's because it's probably 7-8 years old. So I do apologise. But it's just we use technology. We don't send accounts out unless we have to. We put them up on the cloud. Clients approve things on the cloud. It's so much more efficient and so much better for everybody and speeds things up. So yes, with hindsight, when I first set the business up with the initial capital I put in, I could have probably spent that more wisely.
I was hoping for perhaps a bigger gaff than some envelope purchases, but clearly the accountant thinks every time he sees those envelopes, oh my goodness, the wastage of money, and it's not a capital investment or something or other. Probably what goes through your head. Simon, thank you very much for your time today. I've taken an awful lot of it. It's been great getting to know you.
It's been lovely getting to know you as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Simon, how do people actually get in touch with you?
The company's website is aysgarthaccountants.co.uk. I'm on Twitter, that's at Simon Accountant. Aysgarth is at aysgarthca. We're both on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm everywhere.
An accountant on Instagram, whatever next. Simon, a good way to end. Best wishes with your business. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.